Hey, welcome back to Capacity Overload. I'm Jason Padgett, the Director of Partnerships and Growth for Citizen AI. We are a vertical AI company that helps clients through nonprofits primarily, but any business that has social services workers, case managers, peer recovery coaches, social workers. We help their clients when they cannot connect with a human being, navigate
Mm,
wraparound services and benefits. And I want to give a big shout out to the fact that OpenAI just put out a really nice grant for nonprofits who are half a million to $10 million in annual operating budget to do just that, social services. So if you're interested in partnering on that, reach out to us. With that, I'll flip it over to my co-host and partner, our Chief Operating Officer, Oliver Belanger.
Thanks, Jason. Hey, everyone. Oliver Belanger, Chief COO of Citizen AI. My background was in large scale government programs before this, and I made my way into the technology sector through a workforce development program many years ago. One thing just to
Yeah.
touch on that Jason just said, we are partnering with many different nonprofits in that 500K to 10 million operating budget range, and we'd be happy to partner with more folks. So if you'd like help and support in making and sending in those applications, we are happy to be partners.
Yes, it's exciting times. And one of the things I have really leaned into before AI came around, and I still do, is LinkedIn. And every once in a while, somebody will reach out to me through LinkedIn that is not trying to solicit me and just say, "Hey, it looks like you're up to some cool stuff. Do you want to talk?" And that happens to be the guy who's on the show today, Luke Bassett, who's all the way up in Fort Wayne, and we're down here in Indianapolis. But you hit me up, and you work in the change management and event hosting space. I'll let you kind of get into that, but you also do a lot with artificial intelligence. And you were like, "Hey, let's meet down in Indianapolis and just have a chat." And I think like 2 hours later, we had to tear ourselves away from what ended up being an awesome chat. And I thought, man, I need to get this guy on the show. So tell everybody a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, to speak to that, I looked at the time after we did have a conversation, and I was blown away by how quick things flew by. So, yeah, really enjoyed that first chat with you, Jason. But like you said, I'm running a events community here in Fort Wayne called Data Exchange. Today is actually a special day because it's where I went public on LinkedIn, announcing that it's turning into my full-time gig. So something that I've been building on the side for over a year, but now I get to focus on it with a lot more effort. And a big part of that is seeing how the community has naturally been growing. And I don't know if you're aware, so Fort Wayne's super dense on the nonprofit side. So I just ran some numbers last week, and we've got over 3,300 nonprofits in a very small space, over 40,000 people employed through those nonprofits. And so just naturally, by way of density, those conversations are coming up a lot. Like you also mentioned, I've worked in a lot of different technology companies, mainly on like the growth side. But more recently was working with a local company called BT Pro Solutions, and they did a lot of custom software application development. And we partnered with several nonprofits here locally. And I think it would be interesting to actually go into some of those specific use cases. Um, but it was answering this exact question. How are they able to leverage AI to have a greater impact for the people that they're serving and the community?
Well, and I know what that makes me think. So I'll throw out the first question, then I'll flip it over to Oliver because I have a feeling you guys are probably going to be able to talk on the technical and development level really well. But if you look at TechPoint, which has the Indiana AI Innovation Network, which is fairly robust down here in Indianapolis, and as well, I think Angie Carroll kind of spearheads that up in Fort Wayne. What I see as a non-technical person going to that, first off, I love it. It's great. It's very eclectic, right? You have everything from people who are just hung a shingle and want to be an AI consultant to enterprise level adoption. Cummins came in and presented, but I don't see a lot of nonprofit people there. I meet
Mm,
through the Chief Data Officers Network and Chief Innovation Officers Network. I meet people who work with nonprofits and who love to work with nonprofits, but I don't see a lot of people from the nonprofit industries coming and wanting to explore how to deploy this technology. Do you see that up in Fort Wayne, or is it a little bit of a different story?
It's interesting. You actually mentioned, LinkedIn as one of the platforms, and I honestly think that that might be a big reason for it, just because I think the AI conversation does tend to be kind of more of a professional ecosystem conversation that's happening, and I think, for whatever reason, a lot of decision makers in the nonprofit space, that might not be where they're living, and so it might just be where these events are getting promoted. Um, I would say it's probably also just in terms of the bench of talent that they have on staff. I know a lot of the nonprofits in this area, they don't have a big IT staff. Actually, as I say that, there's organization, Lasting Change up here in Fort Wayne, and I think I can disclose. They're actually kind of gearing up to offer some of these MSP kind of back office services for other nonprofits, just because they see a huge need, where they don't have a staff that's kind of looking at new technology and able to implement. And there's a lot of, I think, fear around adopting some of these technologies, and how are they handling data, these kind of questions. And so they're able to actually step in from the nonprofit world and be good stewards of those conversations. But yeah, I want to loop in more in my community, and that's one reason I was excited to talk to you guys, is just because there is such density here. But to your point, not many are actively engaged on the technology side of the conversation.
I guess one of the questions I'm thinking about is, as a place of convening, and a place of convening that is oriented around technology, oriented around these ideas. What is drawing nonprofits? What is drawing, and let's expand it from nonprofit, mission focused organizations, mission focused individuals. They could be nonprofits, they could be B Corps, they could be in government or city government, what have you. What is drawing them into the space?
I think it's that ability to extend reach. I think as soon as people start having that aha moment where they can multiply their efforts, through tactful automation, and then I think a lot of the things, if you are on LinkedIn and you're seeing people talk about like agentic workflows and this kind of stuff, like it's all very sexy and like interesting, but there's also just like a lot of low hanging fruit. When I was at BT Pro Solutions, the use cases that were coming in the door are pretty benign. It's recording meetings for executive summaries. It's being able to get through your inbox quicker. It's getting like market intelligence reports, and just kind of setting up some tools to get that information in front of you so you can make decisions easier. It's not making PowerPoints anymore. It's these kind of things. So I mean, as cool as some of the workflows are, it's also just mm, experimenting. And Jason, you mentioned AI in Fort Wayne, Angie Carroll's event. I think like that's a great example of an event that is just exposing people at a really high level of what's out there and what people are doing, and how it's not scary to just start, testing.
Yeah.
Um, to give a concrete example, so we worked with nonprofit Windswell Foundation. They used to be AWS Foundation here in Fort Wayne. And, so they're providing resources to their clients. And they actually got past that first like tier of engagement where they were getting into Copilot, they were, recording emails, this kind of stuff. And they were ready to actually adopt and take it a step further. And so what that looked like for them was actually integrating it into their search function. So just being able to route services and resources to themselves internally, actually,
Hmm.
but also to their users.
Hmm. What are some examples of services and resources they were routing?
Yeah, so I to give a lot of specifics, I probably wouldn't be. I didn't work on the project
Sure.
directly,
Sure.
but they're one of the bigger foundations in Fort Wayne. And I think a lot of it is like crisis mitigation.
Sure. Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah,
Kind of things
we
that they're writing.
it comes to mind. We a lot of the work that we do is basically oriented around that routing of
Yeah, for
resources
sure.
specifically, and the really hard thing on that. Is keeping the data accurate, keeping the data verified, and keeping up to date with all the changes. And just
Yep.
ends up being a way larger undertaking than people realize when they think about a resource guide or they think about these different things. Then the other part of that is being able to interact and communicate with clients through different technology means um, to expand from just phone calls or being able to meet in person. Um, but it just was the reason it came to mind. What
Yeah.
what are what are some of the other use cases that you've seen and come across in the nonprofit space as folks are
Yeah.
trying to kind of increase their adoption, understand the technology, move forward, all of that?
So this one's, I would say, more adjacent to it because it is a for-profit company, but it's kind of service-led
Hmm.
kind of positioning, I guess. So the company is Sovereignify. So the guy's name is Jeff Smith, and his background's actually in like AAA game engineer for big name game developer, kind of a background. But where how he's leveraging AI in this new venture of his is, he had this phrase when I was chatting with him, the ROI of helping people, and so again it goes to that ability to use AI as a lever to, I mean, really remove suffering. I mean, I think when we think about, okay, we've got these new tools, like what's actually worth doing, um, and it's like making cool apps, like sending more emails, like it's great. Um, but when there's such a powerful tool, I think the more interesting question is, how can we actually apply that to our own communities and really focus on suffering,
Sure.
and are there things that we can do to just alleviate the pain of our neighbors, and so how that's playing out for him is he's actually got his flagship product, I think it's called Shepherd, but it's living on Discord servers for communities. So basically if there are conversations that are happening and someone seems to be in a state of crisis or needing um, help,
Hmm.
it's very seamlessly routing, in conversation, to resources. It's not something that would be public on the forum, so it's very, private. Um, but I thought that was really cool. And then, in terms of kind of looking in your own backyard and what you're already familiar with, him and his wife have fostered some children, and so I think their experience there, they were exposed to a lot of gaps in the infrastructure, at kind of multiple levels of the foster care system. So he's actually using AI to address that, kind of building a layer to get all these disparate systems,
Hmm.
talking. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really great application of AI, because it is so good at analysis, tying things together
Hmm.
and synthesizing. With all the standard caveats.
Hmm.
Um, but he's taken something that he has direct experience with, and I think that's also important because I think our economy has valued specialization to a really high degree. Whereas AI allows generalists, people that, they might still have like domain specific
Hmm.
exposure, but they're able to like reach in and actually make a much bigger impact just
Hmm.
by, you know, I've got a background in engineering. I've touched the foster care system. I've got some aesthetic sensibility because of game design. But I'm able to
Hmm.
combine all those things together, and make something that is really helping people and like a very meaningful way. Um, so yeah, I think that's a huge unlock. It was just, and I think if nonprofits see, I mean, it's really as simple as we can help more people. I mean that's pretty. straightforward.
Yeah.
One of the things that you brought up though that made me think when you were talking about specialized software and selling it to nonprofits, because I've worked in the nonprofit space. When I was at the Salvation Army, we had Salesforce as our CRM. We had
Mm,
all kinds of great case management software. When I worked at smaller nonprofits, we had donor databases that were based on, they knew every one of them and how much it was going to cost us to use them. But I wonder if that
mm.
whole you need to be a little bit more exploratory. It's not as out of the box with AI is where the hang up is sometimes with people because it is something that you kind of have to play with. I love the idea that you said also of lean into what you know. Like that was where I started with AI. I was doing digital marketing for the Salvation Army and I started leveraging AI for that. And then eventually I started to try other things on it. But if you
Mhm.
really lean into what you already know and see how much you can amplify that, then you start getting a little more curious.
Well, to that point, when executives were coming in, uh, I have so many emails that have the phrase "do something." Like I need to do something, and literally those two words. And so I'm thinking of one example where the woman was a CFO, for-profit organization, but CFO, and now she's kind of overnight head of AI, right? And not no technical background, but someone's got to do it, and you got to do something because everybody else is doing something, and we're going to be left behind if we don't. Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of fear and anxiety around like FOMO, with not utilizing AI, and in that example, mm, it's interesting because there was a hang up in terms of what platform do we use, what model is the best for us, and in this case, I think this is probably true for a lot of nonprofits. They've already got Microsoft 365. You know, they've already got access to Copilot. When you're talking about data exposure and this sort of thing, it's like if you're already signed off on Microsoft, you're already trusting it with your email data. You're already trusting the provider, and so to utilize Copilot isn't a big gap. I think it's having some education on what to put in, and I think people do need to be cognizant of like what gets trained. And maybe to that point, another thing that's come up, just seeing these use cases, is the initial conversation tends to be a lot more around, or the question is about policy, like what policy should we adopt for adopting AI in our organization. And again, I think that's useful. But the reality is, if you put in your organization and Claude or ChatGPT, you give it access to your website, and you say, write a AI policy for our organization. In terms of the document that it spits out, it's going to be 90% of the way there. So like the policy itself isn't really the thing to think through. We found that there was a lot more valuable in actually having a thoughtful executive level sit down conversation around incident management. And that's the thing where, okay, so we are rolling this out and some data does get exposed, like what do we do, in that case? And that tends to be a more you know productive, I think, worthwhile conversation to have. um the policy, that's training, that's just getting people on board, getting buy-in. But yeah, to the point I already made, most people already have access. Um,
Look, I got to
and
interrupt
they're,
you.
yeah.
I got because when I was at a community care medicine company before I came to Citizens, I did exactly that. Put in
Mm,
Claude, write our policy. Then I sent it to Purdue University cybersecurity people, and the only thing they said we didn't have was a mitigation policy for what happens when something goes. So it's literally exactly what you said. I've seen play out before.
mm. Well, glad I nailed that one.
You nailed that one.
Well,
Yep.
one thing to just share is for folks who may be in the Google ecosystem as opposed to the Microsoft ecosystem, Gemini is Google's AI product. And so, following the exact same logic of you already trust them with your files, your emails, and all of that with your data, the Google ecosystem equivalent of that would be using Gemini as a model. Just to share a quick thing there. When Luke, when you're thinking about and having these conversations around, incident management, This might be a really good opportunity to talk about the different kinds or different categories of incidents that uh, folks may want to have in mind as they think through things like incident management. Well, do you have a few examples that come to mind that have come up in some of these conversations?
Yep. So I mentioned at the top that I've had a lot of exposure to different types of technology companies, and so one of those was a cybersecurity company, and really kind of on the forefront of, I mean, different ways that people were trying to get into systems, and so the big one that's kind of a fresh new topic is like prompt injection
Hmm.
attacks, and so this how it plays out is just being cognizant of what you're actually bringing in
Hmm.
from a documentation standpoint when you are building out prompts and things.
Hmm.
um, and not to sidestep the question, but like I think another thing just to keep in mind is a lot of times if something does happening, the, the reality is the organization might not ever know, and that is a scary part, if that data does get if sensitive data does get put into the system, um, the reality is it might not ever come to light. Um, and so it is more of this gauge of, man, I mean, we all hate like the phishing training,
Hmm.
for emails, but I think it is kind of like that level of training too.
Hmm.
Um, and I think those tools will evolve where, when there's monitoring and organizations being able to actually see what users are putting
Hmm.
into these platforms,
Hmm.
and kind of flag things kind of midstream.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that will happen more. In terms of other types of, incidents, I think I've already said it, but just training, the model's getting trained on PII, so personal identifiable
Hmm.
information. It's been interesting talking with people in like the healthcare space, and finance, like how they're actually dealing with HIPAA compliance
Hmm.
and more regulated industries.
Hmm.
So I think if people are curious about that, because I'm assuming a lot of like nonprofits are working in the,
Hmm.
it's personal identifies and personal identifiable information sensitive, you know, case data and information. It's probably worth looking at those examples.
Yeah. One thing just to share for folks, um, Google's Gemini AI does offer a BAA for processing both on their cloud computing as well on the use of Gemini, meaning that it is possible to use Gemini in a HIPAA compliant way. Um,
Uh-huh.
there's different procedures you can go through to get access to those agreements. So if you're a healthcare or nonprofit organization thinking about a model and you need your model provider to be able to provide a BAA in order to be HIPAA compliant as you move forward, Gemini does offer this as a capability. I believe, though I am not 100% certain, I suspect that Microsoft does and would as well, but I do not know for sure if that's the case. Notably, I believe ChatGPT and Anthropic do not, which are, between the four of them, we've kind of covered the major general AI tools. So if you are worried about the HIPAA compliance and capability of the underlying AI tool that you are using, um, you know, Gemini does have that capability. Uh, Microsoft Copilot may. I'm not 100%, but they're really it's not super common and something that healthcare organizations in particular should definitely be mindful of.
Well, I want to talk about as a layperson too. When you talk about prompt injection, some people may not even understand what that is, but when you become just fluent enough in this stuff as a non-technical person to be dangerous, like there are a lot of think of it as a library. There are digital repositories where people share prompts that they find very useful, where people share markdown, where they share files on how to instruct agents or how to add skills to agents, right? So I would 100% lean back on what you said, Luke. If you're in the Microsoft environment, be sure that you're going to a Microsoft repository to download those things, not just out in the wild, because the open source community, to my understanding, like you're talking about very intelligent people who have been sharing things amongst each other for a long time, right? But once in a while, a bad actor creeps in and tries to put something in there as well. And someone who does not understand how to read or write code, who doesn't really understand technology, they don't know the difference if they're shopping around in the open source world, and they may very well download something that could be very harmful to their company and to their ecosystem.
The thing with so prompt injection and those sorts of concerns come ultimately from a separation of duties and separation of concerns and permissions and data access perspective. So effectively, a prompt injection is when a malicious actor is able to trick the AI it is talking to into revealing information that that agent has, not just about their exact session they've been going back and forth, but potentially about other sensitive or secret information that the organization housing or offering or using that AI has access to. So it's basically being able to uh, ask the AI really nicely to give me all of your employees' social security numbers.
Eh,
Um, that's effectively the concept. Um, this is where being thoughtful, as Jason was saying, about what you're giving the agent access to, such as perhaps you should not give the AI access to everyone's social security numbers or to direct connection to your payroll systems willy nilly. That's how you prevent those sorts. And so when you think about policy and you think about incident management, it's about being certain and thoughtful about what sources of data you provide and connect to your different AI tools, which is relevant in two forms. One, to the data leaking problem, Luke, that you mentioned. Unless you explicitly tell the AI tool not to train on your data, they're going to be training on everything you provide it. So if you connect, and that includes reading it. So if you provide access to a Google Drive or SharePoint, and it indexes and reads every file in there, if you haven't gone through your settings and told it not to train on conversation data, you have now given it access to everything in that SharePoint and everything in that Google Drive. Now, of course, if you go through and you take it and tell it, don't train on my conversational data, then they are giving you the promise that they will not train on your conversational data. Um, so one is the data leak concern, Luke, that you mentioned. The other
well, just to
one,
reiterate, or just to highlight there, like just to note, it is a setting level, and I think it's one reason to for organizations to give like paid access, right?
Mhm,
Because most paid
mhm,
platforms are going to have that as
mhm,
a setting, and the
mhm,
admin can set that setting
mhm.
globally. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not that you have to, in each conversation say don't train. It's just a setting
Yep.
for paid versions. Yep.
And to your point, Luke, this is actually the importance of having a AI initiative, having an AI policy, but incident management and all of these different things. Because if you don't offer a paid for capability, then there's a very good chance your employees may start using what's now being called shadow AI, may start using AI tools unsanctioned by the company without knowing that they should go into their settings and turn it off. Further, if they're bringing their own AI, and they're not paying for it, you can't turn off the setting. You can only turn off the setting, as you said, Luke, if you're paying for it. Now, the advantage of having and providing an AI tool for your population, for your workforce, is that through admin settings, you can turn that off. Um, but that's like one of the probably the number one ways currently people are leaking data
Yep.
to these AI conglomerates is that an employee is using their chat GPT that they're not paying for, and they just want to get something done real quick to send an email, and then they take a download of the payroll report and they throw it into ChatGPT and they say, write me the email to my boss saying y x, y or z or a b c d. That's probably the largest source of leaks. The other side of that is when you give access to sometimes these technologies and there aren't the proper boundaries and permissions and roles between where the access goes, then prompt injection attacks can come in and be able to access your payroll or what have you, information they because the AI has access to it
There's no separation.
and there's no separation.
Yeah.
And so those would be kind of two of the major ones. The data leak one is one where you're just volunteering your information to the labs. The prompt injection one is where, because there isn't a hard separation between these different sensitive sources of data, then someone can trick the AI into giving more than it should. These are attack vectors that can be mitigated against through mitigation plans and different security rules and all of that. But this is where I think some folks in the nonprofit sector in particular who are more sensitive to the value of public trust worry. And it's probably why they are like, I want to start with the policy to make sure I'm not creating a problem for myself in the process. Unfortunately, to your point, Luke, they may be creating by not acting, they may be opening up a reason
Eh.
for employees who aren't trained, haven't gone through the phishing equivalent training to know this is what you're risking when you're doing X, Y, or Z. Because man, these tools are so powerful. It's so easy to drop a file in there and not even think about it and just be in the habit and get the easy output.
Well, as you're saying that, it makes me. It's really interesting, like human nature question. Because I think it's really hard once you found an easier way to do something to revert to a harder way. There's the jobs creation, antidote where someone goes to a job site, sees people working with spoons, and there's an excavator right there, and it's like, why are you doing the spoon? It's a job program. But I think that plays out where, if you, but it's also like a really important signal for, I think, leadership. I'm thinking about a guy in my community, TJ Patterson. He is a CIO at a regional bank, and so very risk conscious, just being in, a growing financial, sector. And, so I was chatting with him about how they're rolling out AI at an organizational level, and he mentioned that there's these people that it's kind of the Pareto principle, right? You've got this small number of people that are the power users
Sure.
that are just like all in, and they are seeing huge gains and effectiveness. Um, and they're also the ones that are creating risk. But I think how he was addressing that is trying to be nuanced in your governance, and so it's like, Jim, I see what you're doing, it's great. Like, and organizationally, there's probably a lot to learn in that experimentation. So I think organizationally, if the organization is able to, kind of give that space to experiment and play because the gains are just so potentially big, um, you know, and 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 also those people end up being the champions for the rest of the organization, and because the workflows that they're able to do and the automations that they're able to set up, actually can ripple out through the organization. Yeah, so maybe it's worth giving Jim the $200,
Yeah.
license, to build and to actually experiment, and make that distinction. Because if you turn it off, if the reaction to that is nope, we're shutting it down, you know, it's hard to go back, and there's nothing stopping somebody from taking a picture, and going on their own, going in their own conversation, to do the work easier. It's really hard to go back once you've, leveraged this really powerful tool. Um, Something else I want to mention. So I mean, we talked about like the data leakage and how the LLMs are using what you're giving them. One thing we were seeing that's I think also worth bringing up on the nonprofit side, because again, my assumption, not being like super deep in the space, is nonprofits are caring a lot about discoverability, and are people actually able to find the resources, and citizen AI. I know you guys are all about that. You're trying to
Hmm.
make that data more accessible and more accurate. Um, and it's worth noting that some of these standards on the website are actually
Hmm.
coming out. So like Cloudflare, they just released website scanner, is it
Mhm.
agentready.com.
Mhm.
So anybody can just go in there, put in their URL, and it's kind of like a Google Lighthouse, kind of these web
Mhm.
statistics for your website. But it's assessing more, is Alexa, able to search that easily. If somebody is looking for resources in ChatGPT,
Mhm.
and they're sending an agentic
Mhm.
call, is it able to
Mhm.
actually make use of your website? So some terms to maybe just make the audience aware about is like robot.txt files. These are invisible to people just like normal users, going onto your site. But there's a whole, conversation about kind of like the second internet, right? Where
Mhm.
or the agentic internet, where a lot more traffic is for these agents, and we're actually seeing that in standards come out for websites. And so just something to be aware of, because when it does come to discoverability,
Mhm.
um, people, searching in different ways for the resources they're trying to,
Mhm.
get. Um, and I guess where I'll wrap up that, it's actually working with the right partner, probably a way significantly easier
Yeah.
lift than trying to like optimize your SEO,
Yeah.
or even getting like ADA compliant with a big like redesign or something like this. The couple of projects we've worked on, or BT Pro Solutions, it's pretty cheap. It's quick, and in terms of that score and how agents are able to view your site, it's actually really easy to make a huge
Mhm.
impact in that score. I mean, really in a couple days. So
That's a great
I want
point.
to lean into a couple of things you just said. So one is because we just got real technical, and so let's go back for a minute. Like one of the things that I heard you say, because I was in martial arts when I was a kid, right? And what I saw a lot of was some angry kids who were pretty tough, but once they moved into the martial arts space and they had the right discipline and they had the right studio and they all had pads, they just became really good, not only in
yeah,
martial arts, but at what they were doing. And so, kind of what I heard you say was if you take those people who are already really energetic and enthusiastic about this and you give them some professional coaching and some guidelines, that they may be your champions inside of your organization. And so I think that that is phenomenal. And then the other thing I think, I've done some work with Central Indiana Education, CIESC. I can never remember what their acronym stands for, but they just had a big conference, and one of their non-technical guys vibe coded the conference app that they used that was for the first time exactly what they wanted for a conference app, right? And it performed exact. Now you're probably talking maybe 1,500 people at a conference. You're not talking about the Olympics and needing a gigantic database for it, but like the unlock in customized software for a smaller business right now,
for sure.
not for Eli Lilly, but for a nonprofit that's for 13, 14 employees. I just think that kind of thing is so exciting. And I people need to lean into that.
Yeah.
I think, the thing to be careful of with the use of AI tools for customized software, who do not have training as software developers, is just that they won't be able to know whether they've created security holes, whether they've created any openings that may cause other issues. And so the thing to do, it's not a reason to not do these things and to not explore those things, but it is to be really thoughtful about the use cases and to be really thoughtful about the environments in which these
Mm.
kinds of explorations are done. So if you're working on an internal tool where everyone using is going to be trusted, then that's a lot lower risk than if you're using it to launch a new product line, which is a very different degree of risk in the two cases. That's not to say that people who don't have that traditional background aren't able to operate in the other environments. But this is where you want to be thoughtful about including more support, including more layers of oversight as part of that, because they don't know what they don't know, and the AI is not going to tell them for them at this level or at this stage of where we are on that.
Come on, Oliver, have some fun. Uh,
There was
I'm,
one that
I'm,
would, but they
I was
took it
just
off the
teasing.
market.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, because The phrase I'm using, like, when I'm thinking about it is like code hardening, right?
Yeah,
So you vibe coded something, but how do you do all the traditional like
yep,
rigor behind it to make it production ready,
yeah,
for launch? And I'm actually surprised. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I think there actually are some um bespoke tools that are giving code generated by an agent to another agent for review. And among my engineering friends, they uh are quite good. I think there's still like that level of human in the loop lack of trust where you do kind of want some responsibility for that thing going out into the world. um but I'm actually surprised that there's not more of a standard, like a standard tool that's been like widely adopted for that code hardening,
yeah.
getting ready to ship.
I think a lot of it has to do with um, there is a economic function that is in assuming the liability
For sure.
involved with doing something. And the problem with the tool is that a robot and an agent and an AI cannot assume liability. I cannot sue the AI. I may be able to sue the organization that operates the AI, but like in I
Yeah.
AIs don't have assets. They're not entities. They're not suable, potentially existing entities. And so there's a lot of these different functions where in theory the activity can be done by AI by a bot. However, a key aspect of the value of that activity is that an individual person or individual entity is assuming the liability involved with that action, which is what allows for that activity and action to be trusted. So in the case of code hardening, like if an AI told an AI and says, "Yeah, it's hardened," who gets fired if there's a massive data breach?
Right.
Where does the consequence go? And so there's a lot of these different, I think, use cases that kind of fall in that category, code hardening being one of them, because part of the value is that assumption of liability, which allows the trust, which then allows it to be put into the wild, and to iterate from it.
That's really interesting because, like, going back to the paid kind of enterprise versions of some of these tools, indemnity is a
Hmm.
like that is a huge value proposition.
Yeah,
My mind goes more to like the copyright
yeah,
use cases where if it outputs something like ChatGPT outputs something that was trained on copyrighted data and there's a lawsuit. If you're creating it with the enterprise tier, there might be some indemnity for your organization around that.
sure.
So I could see maybe like um a code hardening solution where maybe that is like the big that's how they win the market is we'll be liable, like
And that would sweep,
but yeah, people would
and they would
game that.
and they would go
Yeah.
out of business
Yep,
because
exactly.
they aren't. I think the most notable, interesting one here is one of the cases involving Harvey, I believe, but it might not have been Harvey. It
Mm,
might have been another one of these legal tech firms. They release an agent, and then licensed lawyers used the agent, and then licensed lawyers submitted motions and various different legal paperwork that
mm,
had fake citations in it. Now,
mm-hmm,
unreal citation is something we hear about in the news all the time. The thing that is important here is that the case was for like $100 million civil case.
mm,
And I believe, if I'm remembering right, the judge basically made the folks who put in the fake AI citations, uh, they threw it out. They said, "Okay, you guys lied. Like you're done." Um,
mm.
and so this created for the client significant damages in the $100 million worth. And so the client sued, and I believe this is an ongoing case right now. Did not sue Harvey. They're suing the law firm who used Harvey. And now the law firm, I believe, is pursuing Harvey. And I believe Harvey's case is in that document that you signed. It says right here that we do, that you agree that we do not have, that the author of whether something is legally appropriate or appropriate work is the licensed lawyer,
Uh,
is the user. It is not us, the AI company, and that's part of their. Which you would have to do if you're going to be like a Harvey doing like this kind of legal work. You would fundamentally it wouldn't even work because they're not the AI is not a licensed lawyer, so it wouldn't even be able to operate if that was the case. Um, but this is like a case of really significant um, legal liability that
uh,
involves this fundamental question of who's responsible. And I think one of the common things that happens with folks as they get used to using AI tools and they go really deep in it is that they start not checking the output as much and they
uh,
start just putting it out there. But the thing to remember, I think, for all folks who are practitioners is the person responsible is the person who is responsible for the work output. The AI is not responsible for anything. It is a tool to help you move forward in that. And we are all responsible for the output that we provide others.
agreed.
So what have we
It is,
said?
and my mind's going to like a different application, with driverless cars, and new concepts that I'm only beginning to like get into, like no fault uh liability and these kind of things, where there are these funds, and it's an interesting question, when the potential is so high for efficiencies and things. Yeah, will we collectively kind of agree, like, there's going to be some mess ups, but we're willing to have kind of like funds that pay out to let us do this work more efficiently, and we'll collectively kind of like pay for that. um and I don't think we're there yet, but I think there are questions that
That's
are
interesting.
happening, because in the autos, it's like the globally the potential to reduce, car crashes and
Mm.
automotive deaths, might be so high, but does somebody want to take on that risk of their car being the one that causes serious
Oh,
industry or something? And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out on more mundane,
yeah.
less life and death examples.
It's like
Let me jump
innovation
in for just a
insurance.
second here because if I'm putting myself in the shoes of the executive director of Jack and Jill's social impact in Crawfordsville, Indiana, while everything we've shared in the last 30 minutes, I think has a lot of validity. What I've heard you say is that mitigating data leaks, cybersecurity, and these things doing things I don't want them to do and getting me in trouble are all extremely complicated and all very, very nuanced. So why would I want to integrate artificial intelligence into my nonprofit when I already have my hands full with the human staff that I have?
My mind goes, kind of what I said at the top, where, and I guess the conversation is part of the problem to a degree, right? Because there are so many cool things you can do. And yet some of the biggest gains, some of the lowest hanging fruit are very simple and mundane. It really is the meeting recordings, and the executive summaries, like, so you have your follow-ups. It's simple automations. And, so I think that's actually an interesting mindset to adopt for a lot of organizations, especially executive leadership, is almost like, what would a ERP implementer, coming into your manufacturing facility do? They're going to observe you doing tasks. They're going to ask, like, what is this process throughout your day? What do you do in your day? And, what are you repeating? And just having close observation of your tasks. And a lot of that's mundane, and it's not going to have a huge risk associated with it. And I think those are the things to like start in terms of automating. Um, you know, yeah, and it's not always adopting a new tool, either. Like, I've mentioned the meeting recording several times, So personally, I love a tool called Granola, and I use that for meeting recording. But all the platforms we've talked about can do that just fine. Copilot, or if you're in Gemini, it's going to be able to do that without a problem. And I think if people haven't dipped their toes into that, um, to our point earlier, they've probably already signed off on those platforms, at an organizational level. And so that's the easiest entry point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's two aspects. One is at this stage, employees are probably using some amount of
Eh,
tools, AI tools. And so most likely you want to dip your toe in because, and you can talk to them. Maybe your employees aren't, and then that's a different conversation. But if they are, you want to give them a sanctioned way to
mm,
be able to use those tools. And getting to that first step of using a simple AI tool is pretty straightforward. If you're, again, as we said, on Microsoft, you can use Copilot. If you're um, on Google, you can use Gemini. They're already in your ecosystem. You're already trusting them, and so that can be a really low lift way to start giving access to those tools, and then going in and being able to. Gemini, by the way, for example, never trains on your data. They just, like, as a policy, don't train on conversational data. That's because they're Google and they have plenty of data. Um, I do not know about Copilot and Microsoft. So these are like easy, low cost, low cost and low risk ways to start getting people exposed and creating a pathway for those people who want to use these tools to do so without causing a lot of issues. One of the cool things you can do if you are concerned about issues about these more general purpose tools is you can open one up and you can ask it, "Hey, I'm concerned about these different things. What do you
eh,
recommend I should do to be able to protect minimally my environment? What kind of policy should I have in place?" And it'll give you something which will, may not be 100% perfect, but will be pretty protective. The other thing, I think, if you're in that segment, Jason, is purpose driven tools are really going to be your friend here because purpose driven tools take on the complexity on your behalf and give you a form of AI that is designed for a specific purpose that you are engaging with them on. So the meeting recording technology that Luke is describing, Granola, there's a variety of different ones,
Otter AI. Yeah.
a bunch of them. Those are purpose driven AI tools that are specifically for the purpose of recording meetings, being able to provide notes, and making those notes more actionable. And so what that means is that you don't have to figure out how to use AI to achieve the goal. You purchase a tool that is designed to use AI to achieve the goal through AI. There are other purpose driven tools out there for various purposes. And so you can then identify vendors and identify providers that you trust, that you believe in, as you have been for a long time, and identify these purpose driven tools that give up flexibility, right? With a general purpose tool, you can do anything in the world in a sense, but you have to take on the complexity of making that safe. Purpose driven tools are going to be putting on guardrails and limiting the capabilities in the process to be specific towards achieving and working towards a very specific goal. Citizen AI, as an example, is purpose driven for navigating people to and helping case managers help navigate people towards community resources. There are a lot of different purpose-driven tools that are out there, and
eh,
those would be the 2 tracks that I would say for folks who are,
Yeah.
feeling overwhelmed already by all the talk that everybody is kinda saying, is to just focus on getting a really basic thing that's already integrated into everything you're using, such as Copilot or Gemini, where the risk is much lower, and then looking into purpose-driven tools to help you move forward.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I have to, 2 years ago when I was working in healthcare, I would have even said, you can get a BAA with Microsoft so that you're HIPAA compliant. Same thing with Google, right? And back in those days, now the foundation model companies are just about profitable, but back in those days, I would say, like, if you weren't in Copilot, if you weren't in Microsoft or you weren't in Google, and there was a huge lawsuit because of the data leak, like, these companies that are still in the red, how do you even know they're gonna show up to court, right?
mm,
As you know, there's a history of Apple, Microsoft, and Google covering their bets and not wanting to look bad to society if they had a fault in things. I would also extend that to say that both of those ecosystems have a plethora of tools. So if you're in the Copilot ecosystem, you can build custom GPT type coaches inside of there. They've actually, I think, put Claude Code inside there so that they they listen more and more to what people are wanting, and there are levels of Microsoft usage that you would have to be a developer to even leverage half of the models in there. So you can take it from like kindergarten level to developer level, and it's the same thing in the Google ecosystem, which has Notebook LM, which is one of my favorite tools. But I will warn everyone out there, if you're not in a paid Google account and you've got Notebook LM and people are sharing it with each other, like that is a possibility of some serious data leak there. But if you have a Notebook LM account that is inside your business account, now you can upload documents and have real-time conversations with them. You can take those granola notes and put them in there from the quarter and say like, "Hey, our business meetings, like, what do we talk about repetitively that we never do?" I've done that.
Eh.
All that kind of stuff is a great unlock. If I had one takeaway from what you guys had to say today, it's pick one of those two ecosystems and pay for it, and then play around with those tools in there until you and your team have a policy and are educated and developed enough to move outside of it.
Well, one thing that's just coming to mind, and I think it's one of the big reasons why, all the graphs with AI product adoption are just, the big hockey stick, is because it is the first product where the tutorial is built in, and that's a good thing to, I think, just like mentally understand. It surprises me, weekly, where I'm like, oh yeah, I can just like ask the thing, to help me, and to make this connection. Jason, I mentioned to you when we first spoke that I'm a big sci-fi fan. There's a Neil Stephenson book called The Diamond Age, and there's this primer that this little girl gets at the beginning of the book. She's impoverished, and it's kind of like this AI book that's educating her. But one of the cool interactions, I mean, mirrors what's happening now with AI very well, where she has a question about the lesson, and it can just like just keep going one layer down, to teach you what you need to know to get that thing accomplished that you're trying to do. So I think like I always have to remind myself, constantly, like I can just ask and keep expanding, and I think that is like a mindset where to grow with the tool. So
And I think, following that, the one more thing that comes to mind, kind of in line with all of those things, is there is no replacement for trying it.
eh,
You can do all the theoretical work and thinking, and this is a different technology. It is a different thing that we are not used to interacting with, and it's imperfect in a myriad of ways, but it's also very interesting and productive in a lot of different ways. And so, the first thing you should do if you're feeling a little bit deer in headlights and overwhelmed is go to a free tool, a ChatGPT free or whatever you want, doesn't really matter, and just start using it. Just don't upload your social security number or give it anything you wouldn't tell a stranger, and just start trying it, because there's an intuition that gets developed from playing with it and trying it and getting a sense of what's possible. And you'll probably go through a journey where you're like, oh my God, this is amazing, you can do everything. And then you'll try to do more and you'll be like, well, actually it messes up here, it messes up there, there's a problem there and the problem here. And just truly just trying it and playing with it and getting used to it is its own step in the journey, and the first one I recommend with, regardless of the tool.
One day you'll put Codex and Cowork in a Slack chat and tell them to work together, and come back 2 hours later and they'll just be arguing over who should be doing what and how they should do it. I did that.
yep. Sounds like lived experience.
Oh, thank you. That was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it myself.
It's a great time.
We'll have to come back on the show again sometime, and we're going to come see you up there in Fort Wayne one of these days.
August 28th, if anybody's in the area, Data Exchange is happening then. So feel free to take a search. And I built the web app, using these tools that we talked about. And Jason, you mentioned building. I forget what kind of platform it was for a conference. I think you mentioned somebody trying to build a conference tool. And I was using different ticketing platforms and things. And I was like, man, I really want this bespoke for what I'm trying to do, and these tools are what made that possible. And kind of maybe a great way to wrap up. The whole goal of the project I'm working on now with Data Exchange is to develop community, and so using these tools to accomplish that, and just in a very like kind of mundane, it's a ticketing app, it's a way to get people registered for an event, but just being able to build something like that I never thought I would be able to do that by myself. I think that's one of these big values that's being unlocked for people in all kinds of organizations.
Now you have to tell, was it Lovable, Replit, Claude Code, or Codex?
That one was Lovable. Yep.
Okay. All right. Shout out to Lovable.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, man. We will have you on the gig.
Cool beans.
All right.